Since the divorce 2 years ago, the life of Adrian Cole, 42, has narrowed into a tight corridor. Work, gym, meetings, sleep. Repeat. No room for emotional distractions, no openings for the improbable. His face is impeccably shaved, his eyes buried in reports he has already read 3 times. Not out of necessity, but out of habit. The clock on the wall reads 10:17 p.m. The rest of the team left hours ago, but for him, the night is still long. Beside his desk, a picture frame remains face down. No one in the company has ever asked, and he has never explained. Yet sometimes, in rare lapses of distraction, he turns it upright, stares at the photograph, and after a few seconds, places it back down, as if opening and closing a door he prefers to keep locked. Across the city, people are preparing for Thanksgiving. Families are reuniting, kitchens are bustling, laughter is filling living rooms. For Adrian, it's just another day on the calendar. The holidays are an inconvenient reminder that life, for some, is still about connection, something he decided he didn't need, or perhaps something he has learned to avoid. Still, there is one detail no one knows. In recent months, a quiet unease has been slipping into the early hours. He wakes for no reason, staring at the ceiling, sensing a restlessness he can't name. It isn't regret. At least he assures himself it isn't. It's something else, subtler, as if a forgotten piece of his story is about to knock on his door. The next morning, the alarm rings at 5:30. The ritual unfolds as always. Black coffee, pressed shirt, perfect tie, taxi to the office. But there's an unusual item on his schedule, a meeting at a law firm on the Upper East Side to close the acquisition of a promising startup. To him, it's just another contract. Nothing that requires emotion. On the way, sitting in the back seat of the taxi, Adrian watches the city through the window. People embracing on sidewalks, children carrying backpacks bigger than themselves, street vendors shouting prices no one listens to. Everything feels distant, as if he were merely a spectator in a film that doesn't involve him. And yet something in him seems alert, though he can't say to what. A shapeless premonition, as if he's about to turn a corner and find something that doesn't belong to the calculated script of his life. The taxi stops in front of a building with a classic facade. The driver wishes him a good day, and he answers with a brief nod. Inside, the scent of polished wood and fresh coffee surrounds him. The elevator arrives quickly, button pressed, doors closing. He doesn't know it yet, but in just a few minutes, that quiet, carpeted hallway will open an irreversible crack in the world he has built. Because sometimes, destiny doesn't knock. It walks right in, without asking permission. Ready for another intense and emotional chapter here on Enchanting Stories? Subscribe to the channel right now, leave your like, because it helps spread our stories to more people who love to feel, imagine and dream along with us. Oh, and tell us in the comments, from which city are you watching us right now? We want to know just how far our stories are reaching. So shall we? The elevator glides smoothly to the 6th floor, and Adrian adjusts the knot of his tie, checking his reflection in the polished metal doors. When they open, he walks down the wide hallway, bathed in a warm yellow light that softens the space. The silence is broken only by the muffled sound of conversations from partially open doors. He moves forward with confidence, folders in hand, unaware that the next door he opens will change the rhythm of his life. The receptionist greets him with a professional smile and invites him to wait. Adrian sits in a leather armchair, scanning the lobby, dark wooden tables, discreet paintings, and the persistent aroma of fresh coffee. In the background, the sound of steady footsteps approaches. He looks up and sees a familiar figure, though time and distance have almost turned her into a stranger. Helena. The impact is immediate, as if the air thinned. She's wearing a beige coat, her blonde hair loosely tied back, and in her arms, a baby in a white knit cap, eyes wide and curious, staring at him as if they already knew him. For an instant, the world seems to lose its sound. Helena sees him too. For a moment, everything freezes, as if both are trying to decide whether this is real or just a cruel mirage? "Helena," Adrian says, his voice a mix of surprise and caution. He stands, his heart quickening, and takes a step forward. His eyes meet hers, then drift to the tiny face nestled in her arms. He avoids the obvious question, for now, perhaps afraid of the answer. Helena pulls the baby closer, as if by instinct. There's no smile, no warmth, just the tension of two worlds colliding. "I didn't expect to see you here," she says, her breath slightly quickened. "Neither did I," he replies, his voice lower than intended. A heavy silence settles between them. The receptionist's phone rings somewhere in the background, but neither moves. He feels the weight of something about to be revealed, something he's already beginning to understand, though he refuses to admit it. The baby lets out a small sound, almost a laugh, and Adrian feels his stomach tighten. There's something hypnotic in the way she looks at him, a recognition he can't explain. "Is she your daughter?" The question comes out almost as a whisper. Helena hesitates. Her gaze shifts between him and the child. Finally, she exhales softly but says nothing. Before any other words can pass between them, a lawyer appears at the doorway calling Helena's name. She nods but doesn't move. Her eyes remain locked on Adrian's, as if there's a battle raging inside her. "We need to talk," she says at last, her tone firm, almost sharp. He feels a tangle of anger, confusion, and a sudden need to know everything, yet also something nameless, a silent pull that holds him in place, as if the ground beneath him is about to give way. Helena adjusts her coat and walks down the hall, the baby nestled in her arms, the white cap bobbing with each step. Adrian remains still, following her with his eyes until she disappears behind a door. The sound of it closing echoes in the space, an invisible line separating the before and the after. He doesn't know how, but he senses that this brief encounter wasn't an accident, and that the answer to the question still hanging in the air, the one Helena hasn't confirmed, will alter every plan, every routine, every certainty he believed unshakable. Adrian spends the rest of the meeting distracted, speaking only when necessary, his mind circling the image he can't shake. Helena, holding a child, looking at him as if she carries a secret too heavy to keep any longer. When the corporate meeting finally ends, he leaves the law office with steady steps, though inside he feels like a man crossing a swaying bridge in the middle of a storm. In the lobby, he finds Helena standing near the exit, coat buttoned to her neck, the baby asleep against her shoulder. She seems to be waiting. He approaches, the air between them thick with old tension, unspoken words, and wounds that never healed. "We need to talk now," he says, more a command than a request. Helena nods and walks to a cafe on the corner. They enter, choose a table tucked away, and sit in silence for several seconds. The steam of freshly brewed coffee lingers in the air, though neither seems to notice. Adrian studies her face, searching for clues in a visage both familiar and distant. She adjusts the baby in her arms and finally speaks. Her name is Sophie. She's 5 months old. The words are slow, each carrying a weight that seems hard to bear. Adrian feels the ground shift beneath him. "Are you telling me she's my daughter?" Helena keeps her eyes on his. "Yes." The confirmation hits him like a blunt blow. Part of him wants to stand and leave, to shield himself from what this means. Another part wants to take the child in his arms and never let go. But his first impulse is anger. "You kept this from me for 5 months?" His voice is louder than he intended. "It wasn't that simple," she replies, her tone controlled but cold. "There were reasons." He lets out a short, humorless laugh. "Reasons? I'm her father, Helena. I had the right to know." "You did," she admits. "But when I found out I was pregnant, I didn't know how you'd react. We barely spoke, and there were things I needed to process on my own." Adrian runs a hand through his hair, trying to order thoughts that come like a swarm. He looks at Sophie, still asleep, her breathing soft, entirely unaware of the storm hanging over the table. A knot tightens in his throat. "I want to be part of her life," he says at last, his voice lower now. "No matter what happened between us." Helena studies him, weighing his words. "I'm not going to stop you from knowing her. But you need to understand, this isn't something you can just fit into your life like another calendar appointment." He absorbs the words, knowing they're true. His carefully controlled life is about to become unpredictable. And for the first time in years, he doesn't know if that scares him or wakes him up. The silence is broken by a faint sound from Sophie, who begins to stir. Helena removes the baby's cap, revealing a tuft of fine hair. Adrian leans in, studying every tiny feature, and a strange recognition grips him. There's something in the shape of her eyes, the soft curve of her brows, that feels like a memory made flesh. He leans back in his chair, his gaze still fixed on her. The anger hasn't vanished, but it's tangled with something far more complex, something he can't yet name. When they part ways, he walks slowly down the street. The city around him is noisy, impatient, but he feels as if time has changed speed. Each thought, each image of Sophie, pushes his life in a direction he never planned, and now cannot ignore. The first visit happens on a gray Saturday, under fine rain and constant wind. Adrian arrives at Helena's building with a black umbrella and a leather briefcase in hand, as if unsure what one brings to meet a daughter he barely knows. He climbs the 3 flights of stairs with measured steps, trying to mask the tight anxiety in his chest. Helena opens the door without ceremony, wearing a light sweatshirt, her hair tied up simply. Sophie is in her arms, awake, in a pale pink onesie, her curious gaze taking in every detail. Adrian steps inside and pauses in the middle of the room, absorbing the scene. Toys in the corner, a blanket on the couch, the scent of coffee and baby powder. All of it so far from the controlled, minimalist space he calls home. Helena sets Sophie in the playpen and goes to the kitchen to prepare drinks, leaving him alone with the child. He approaches slowly, kneeling to her level. Sophie holds a star-shaped toy and stretches it out toward him, as if offering it. Adrian takes it carefully, feeling a strange warmth spread through his fingers. The baby laughs, a small sound, but enough to dissolve some of his stiffness. "You're smaller than I imagined," he murmurs, almost to himself. Helena returned with 2 cups of coffee and watched the scene for a few seconds before sitting down. There wasn't much conversation at first. Silence felt safer. But gradually, she began explaining her daughter's routine, sleep schedules, feedings, the songs that calmed her. Adrian listened intently, asking questions that sounded less like casual curiosity and more like attempts to understand a universe that until now had been completely foreign to him. In the days that followed, he began rearranging his schedule to come back. He canceled meetings, turned down corporate event invitations, rescheduled trips. Each visit revealed new details. The way Sophie wrinkled her nose at loud noises, the concentrated expression she wore when trying to reach for something just out of grasp, the way she nestled into his shoulder after feeding. One day, Helena placed the baby in his arms without warning. The light weight, the warmth, and the sweet scent mixed with milk made Adrian hold his breath. Sophie waved her hands in the air and then gripped one of his fingers with surprising strength. For a few seconds, the world around him seemed to fall silent. A knot formed in his throat, and a part of himself, the one protected for years behind layers of work and discipline, began to open. The visits became more frequent. He learned basic tasks, changing diapers, preparing bottles, rocking the baby to sleep. At first, his movements were tentative, as if he feared breaking something so small. But over time, he grew more confident, developing an instinct he never knew he had. One afternoon, while rocking Sophie in his arms, he realized he was smiling without noticing. Helena, seated on the couch, remarked in an almost neutral tone, "She likes you." It wasn't an empty compliment, but a statement of fact. Adrian only nodded, feeling the weight behind the words. Each visit ended with him walking to his car, carrying the sense that something in his life was changing irreversibly. His routine, once as precise as a Swiss watch, now had unexpected pauses. Spaces he didn't want to fill with anything except that child's presence. Over time, he noticed even his own apartment, silent and meticulously organized, felt less welcoming. It lacked the sound of little laughs, the scent of baby powder, the living mess of scattered toys. And though he didn't say it out loud, he missed it on the days he didn't see Sophie. Adrian's life, which had always followed straight lines, was beginning to curve. And without realizing it, he was learning to move along those bends. The news arrived unexpectedly, like a shard slicing through glass. Adrian was in his office, reviewing a contract, when he received a short message from a colleague in communications. "Have you seen this?" Attached was a link to a local news blog. Opening it, the headline jumped out. "Tech giant CEO hiding newborn daughter. Sources close to the family confirm." Beneath it, a distant photograph of him entering Helena's building, with Sophie in his arms. The text didn't mention full names, but left enough clues for anyone to connect the dots. It hinted at why he might keep the child out of the public eye and used carefully chosen phrases to stir curiosity and drive clicks. At the end, the writer promised more revelations in the coming days. Adrian read and reread, a mix of fury and growing concern building in his chest. His first reaction was to grab the phone and call the journalist, someone he knew from other sensationalist pieces. The call went to voicemail. He left a short direct message warning them to stay away from him and his family, but it was too late to contain the damage. That same day, he received 3 calls from industry colleagues and 1 from the company's legal department. Pressure came from all sides: protect the company's reputation, avoid market speculation, and most importantly, keep his personal life out of headlines. By late afternoon, he decided to go to Helena's apartment. She opened the door with a serious expression, Sophie in her arms. Before he could say a word, she said, "I've seen the article." He stepped in, closing the door hard. "I don't know how they found out, but I know this won't stop here. I don't want reporters at my door, Adrian. I don't want photographers following us on the street. And you think I do?" He took a deep breath, trying to keep his voice level. "I'll handle it." She shook her head. "Handle it how? Calling and threatening them? That will only make them more interested." Adrian rubbed his face, fighting irritation. "I have resources. I can hire security, sue for defamation, whatever it takes." But Helena seemed more concerned about Sophie than any legal maneuver. "I just want her to be safe. I don't want her growing up seeing her name tied to scandals." The conversation stayed tense. Sophie, oblivious, played with Helena's necklace, making soft sounds. Adrian looked at his daughter and felt the true weight of the situation. This wasn't just about protecting his public image. It was about protecting her, even if she was too young to understand. In the following days, Adrian moved quickly. He involved lawyers, tracked the leak, and learned the journalist had received photos and details from a source close to the family. That detail unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. Despite the pressure, he kept visiting Sophie, though now with added vigilance. 2 discreet bodyguards on the street, a car always parked nearby, heightened awareness of every suspicious movement. Helena didn't like their presence, but deep down, she knew it was necessary. One afternoon, as he laid Sophie in her crib after rocking her to sleep, Adrian realized how much the situation had awakened something primal in him, a protective instinct that went far beyond logic or duty. The thought of someone using his daughter's image for clicks filled him with a rage he could barely contain. And though he tried to stay composed, he already knew he was willing to cross any line to make sure it never happened again. It was nighttime when Helena asked him to come by her apartment. The message was short, without explanations, but carried a weight that left no room for postponement. Adrian arrived around 9, removing his coat as soon as he stepped inside. Sophie was asleep in her room, the low light in the living room casting long shadows on the walls. Helena sat on the couch, a brown envelope on the coffee table. "We need to talk," she said plainly. Adrian sat across from her, trying to read her expression. It wasn't just seriousness. There was something restrained, as if she were about to release words that had grown too heavy to hold. She slid the envelope toward him. "I found this a few months ago." He opened it and pulled out several printed pages. Just a few lines were enough to recognize them. Copies of emails, sent years ago, between him and a doctor. Subject, vasectomy. Date, 7 years earlier. His stomach tightened. Turning the page, he found more emails from 2 years ago about a reversal surgery. "You spied on me?" he asked, trying to mask his discomfort. "I was going through boxes after moving and found this on my old computer." "That's not spying," she replied firmly. "But it does explain a lot." He took a deep breath, resting the pages on his knee. "I didn't think it was relevant to tell you at the time." Helena let out a short, humorless laugh. "Not relevant? We were married, Adrian. You decided on your own that you didn't want kids, then decided on your own that you did again. And in neither case did you tell me." "The vasectomy was before we got married," he argued. "But the reversal wasn't," she cut in, her voice sharpening. "You did that 2 months before asking for a divorce." The words hung in the air, heavy and almost tangible. Adrian looked away, as if the wood grain on the floor might offer an answer. "I had my reasons," he said at last. "I didn't want to create expectations or disappointment. The problem is, you've always decided what I could or couldn't know," Helena said, leaning forward. "As if I were just a spectator in your life, not part of it." He stayed silent. There was no quick argument that could erase years of unilateral decisions. The soft hum of Sophie's nursery fan seemed to mark the slow passage of time. "When I found out I was pregnant," Helena continued, "I didn't know what to think. Part of me thought it was impossible she was yours. Part of me wanted to believe. But deep down, I was tired of trying to guess what your truth was." He lifted his gaze. "And now? Now I know she's your daughter. I had the test done. I never doubted, but I needed to be sure." The confirmation landed with a strange weight. It wasn't a surprise, but it wasn't simple either. It felt like the truth had pushed him out of a safe place, forcing him to face not just fatherhood but the very pattern of detachment he had cultivated for years. "Sophie deserves you to be present," Helena said, calmer now, "but not as someone who makes all the decisions alone." Adrian nodded slowly, sliding the papers back into the envelope. Its weight seemed greater than the pages inside. He stared for a few seconds at the nursery door, picturing his daughter sleeping, unaware that her life was being redefined with every conversation between these two adults. As he stood to leave, he realized there was no easy way out. Helena didn't just want him to acknowledge paternity. She wanted him to change. And for the first time, he considered that maybe it was inevitable. The rain was hitting the windows when Adrian returned to Helena's apartment 2 days later. The invitation, or perhaps summons, had come from her in a brief message, as if the weight of what still needed to be said couldn't fit into typed words. When he stepped inside, he found her standing in the living room, arms crossed, expression closed. Sophie slept in the other room, the sound of the baby monitor pulsing softly in the background. "We need to finish that conversation," Helena said, without formalities. Adrian took off his coat, hanging it up slowly, as if prolonging the gesture could delay what he knew was coming. He sat down on the couch, but Helena stayed standing, pacing back and forth. "Do you understand what that surgery meant to me when I found out?" she began. "It wasn't just about children, Adrian. It was about trust, about knowing we were on the same team." He held her gaze but didn't answer immediately. "I thought I was protecting both of us." "Protecting us from what?" She stopped and turned to face him. "From difficult conversations?" From the possibility that I'd say something you didn't want to hear? The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken accusations. Adrian took a deep breath. I didn't know how to talk about it. And back then, I wasn't sure I wanted to start a family again. But you decided for both of us, Helena shot back. It's always like this. You choose, I find out later. The tension in the room was almost physical. He felt the weight of her words, but also the resistance to give in. Part of him wanted to justify every choice. Another part was starting to understand that maybe there wasn't enough justification. And yet, Helena continued, when I found out I was pregnant, I didn't look for you. You know why? Because I knew you'd react by trying to control everything. You'd want to turn it into an operation, like it was just another project for your company. Adrian lifted his chin. And you thought it was better to exclude me completely? I thought it was better to protect my peace. And Sophie's peace. He leaned back on the sofa, absorbing the blow. He looked toward the bedroom door, imagining Sophie lying there, her small hands clenched in an unconscious gesture. Something tightened in his chest. Not anger, but the realization that he had lost moments that would never come back. So why are you telling me now? He asked, his voice lower. Helena sighed, finally sitting down. Because you deserve to know. Because she deserves to know who her father is. But also because I saw you had changed, at least a little. When you started showing up, when you made an effort to learn how to care for her, I realized there was room to try. The words hung in the air. Adrian felt it was the first time in a long while that she admitted seeing something in him beyond his mistakes. I was wrong, he said after a few seconds. I won't deny it. But I don't want Sophie to grow up thinking I'm just that. Helena looked at him, reading every expression as if searching for signs of sincerity. Then you'll have to prove it. Not with promises, but with presence. He nodded, feeling that this was a silent pact. The sound of Sophie crying from the bedroom broke the tension for a moment. Helena got up, went there, and came back holding the baby, still sleepy. Without saying a word, she handed her to him. Adrian held her, feeling the light weight and familiar warmth. Sophie opened her eyes for a moment, as if trying to recognize where she was, then closed them again. As he rocked her, he realized it wasn't just about earning Helena's trust. It was about learning to be someone his daughter could recognize as a safe harbor, even if that meant dismantling the way he'd always lived. The morning was bright when Adrian crossed the Brooklyn Bridge, the cold wind cutting across his face. He had spent the night awake, reflecting on everything Helena had said. The decision had already been made before sunrise, but now, with every step, it gained real weight. He didn't want to be just a sporadic presence in Sophie's life. He wanted to build a space that was hers too. He arrived at Helena's apartment with a folder under his arm. Sophie was sitting on the living room carpet, playing with colorful blocks while Helena organized some papers. He approached his daughter, sitting down on the floor. Sophie looked at him for a moment, then extended a block toward him as if she was already used to her father's presence. I've thought a lot, he began, not taking his eyes off the baby. About the three of us, about how I want to be truly present. Helena sighed deeply, waiting for what he would say. I want to propose something, he continued. Shared custody. I don't want to just visit. I want to be here on the good days, the bad days, every day. The silence that followed was almost tangible. Helena put down the papers and crossed her arms. You know it's not that simple. I know. But I'm willing to rearrange everything to make it possible. He took a deep breath, preparing for the next part. I've even started looking for an apartment in Brooklyn. It doesn't make sense for me to be miles away. Helena raised her eyebrows, surprised. Are you serious? More serious than I've been in a long time. He looked at her directly. I want Sophie to grow up knowing her father is close. She leaned back on the couch, assessing. And what about your work? You live for that. I can live for more than one thing, he replied with a slight smile. It won't be easy, but I don't want her first memory of me to be a man who only showed up sometimes. Sophie, oblivious to the conversation, banged 2 blocks together, making a sound that drew an involuntary smile from both. Helena took a deep breath. Shared custody means real commitment. It means you'll have to give up trips, events, negotiations that can't wait. I know, he said firmly, and I'm ready for that. She was silent for a few seconds, as if weighing every word before speaking. I'll need to trust that you won't give up halfway. I won't give up, he replied without hesitation. The conversation continued for a few more minutes, discussing logistics, routines, schedules. There was no euphoria, no empty promises, just the careful building of an agreement that would change all their lives. Before leaving, Adrian went to Sophie and picked her up. She grabbed the collar of his shirt and rested her face on his shoulder. That simple gesture made him feel he was on the right path. That same day, he began visiting apartments in Brooklyn. He entered empty spaces, imagining where he'd put the crib, where Sophie would play, which wall would hold the drawings she'd make when she was older. He wasn't looking for luxury or sophistication. He sought closeness, warmth, the feeling that a real home could exist there. When he found a modest but bright space, with large windows and a small extra bedroom, he knew it was the right place. He signed the lease within a few days, feeling that, for the first time in a long while, an important decision wasn't tied to numbers or strategies, but to something much simpler and vital. The following week, he called Helena to tell her he already had a new address. "I want you to see it," he said enthusiastically, an invitation for her to witness the future he was trying to build. And for the first time, he noticed Helena didn't respond with skepticism. She simply said, "I'll come see it, yes." The apartment still smelled of fresh paint when Adrian opened the windows to let the cold morning air in. Boxes were stacked in the living room, some open, revealing small clothes, toys, and children's books he had bought in the past few days. Sophie's room, painted a soft shade of green, already had the crib assembled, an armchair near the window, and a low shelf waiting to be filled. Sunlight streamed in, illuminating dust particles dancing in the air. He ran his hand along the edge of the crib, imagining his daughter sleeping there, breathing peacefully. Nearby, a soft rug covered the center of the room, ready for first steps and the playtimes to come. On the dresser, a picture frame still without a photo waited for the right moment to be filled. Late that morning, Helena arrived holding Sophie in her arms. The little girl looked around with wide eyes, curious about the new surroundings. Adrian opened the door with a restrained, almost shy smile. Helena entered slowly, observing every detail. She didn't say anything at first, just walked through the space, touching the furniture, appreciating the care he had put into it. "You really thought of everything," she finally said, as she placed Sophie on the rug. The baby began to explore, crawling over to reach a wooden toy. "I wanted her to have a place here that was hers," Adrian replied, crouching down to play along. Sophie let out a joyful sound, clapping her hands on the floor, and he smiled, feeling a lightness he hadn't experienced in years. Helena looked out the window, then back at him. "I hope you keep this." "I will," he said without hesitation. "This isn't temporary." They spent part of the day there, adjusting details. Helena helped organize the toy shelf while Adrian put clothes away in the small closet. Sophie, from time to time, paused to watch the two of them, as if she already understood that this moment was special. When Helena said goodbye, leaving Sophie to spend the night with him for the first time, there was a brief silence between them at the door. She seemed to measure if she was ready for this, and he, in turn, knew that this gesture was more than trust. It was a sign that something was changing. Night fell, and Adrian followed the routine Helena had taught him. Bottle, warm bath, soft pajamas. Sophie fell asleep in the crib, and he stayed for a few minutes watching her, her breathing steady, her face serene. The apartment, once so empty, now felt alive. In the quiet of the early morning, he woke to her crying. He got up quickly, picked her up, and rocked her until she fell back asleep. He felt strangely comfortable in this role, as if it had always been part of him. just to sleep. At dawn, he made coffee while Sophie played on the living room rug. The sound of her laughing alone filled the space in a way no professional achievement ever had. He realized he was smiling too, effortlessly, without trying to control anything. When Helena returned to pick her up, she found the apartment tidier than expected, and Sophie in a good mood, holding one of the colorful blocks. "Looks like you did well," she commented, and he just shrugged. But inside he felt a quiet pride. After they left, Adrian stayed for a few minutes looking at the empty crib. It wasn't sadness. It was the awareness that now there was a new rhythm in his life, made of arrivals and departures, of small gestures that, added together, formed something much bigger. He knew there were no guarantees, no eternal promises, but there was a real commitment to Sophie, to himself, and somehow, also to Helena. A new beginning that didn't ask for certainties, only presence. And for the first time, Adrian was ready to stay. At the end of everything, what matters is having those we love close no matter what. And so, we close another intense and emotional chapter here on Enchanting Stories. If you connected with this story and want to keep traveling through narratives that touch the heart and mind, you know what to do. Subscribe to the channel right now and join this community that grows every day. Here, every story is a meeting, and every subscriber is a friend joining the circle. Don't forget to leave your like, because that helps spread our stories to more people who love to feel, imagine, and dream along. Oh, and tell us here in the comments, which city are you watching from right now? We want to know how far our stories are reaching. Click the subscribe button, hit the bell so you don't miss a thing, and get ready for the next dive into the universe of emotions that only Enchanting Stories brings to you.